Well, good morning. It's May 9th, 2023, and I'm actually standing down here in the Mohawk River, waiting for the dam here at Tribes Hill to be set, the movable dam. So this is Lock 12 and Dam 8 on the New York State Barge Canal System. And later this afternoon, those gates and uprights there will be lowered and stopping the water, stopping the flow of water, creating navigation pools along the river. This affords a nice time to look at the Mohawk River and think back to the early times in New York State settlement when the native peoples and the early settlers would have to get across the state. East-west travel was along this transportation route, the river, and it sort of looks natural. Obviously, it's because of all the when it does flood, this all would have been trees and growth, obviously, but this all floods out and dies now. That deeper area over there is a navigation channel, so that has been dredged. So it's almost safe to say at one point you could probably, during low water, walk across the Mohawk River. And if you think back to times when the bateaus and the canoes and rafts would float along here carrying the goods from east to west and west to east, it's pretty neat to think of. So that was before the Erie Canal times. In the 1820s, when they started building the Erie Canal, they made a shift away from the Mohawk River and this transportation route, and moved over to an axle dug canal, which raises the point here that this is, even though they call it Erie Canal, it's technically a navigation. I get kind of hung up on that, pointed out all the time, but when you improve a natural body of water to make a canalized river, it becomes a navigation. It's not technically a canal. A canal is a hand-dug, man-made, completely man-made creation. And if you want to see, this is Fort Hunter, so if you want to see the actual Erie Canal, it's over that way about a half mile, where the Schoharie Aqueduct is and Schoharie Crossing. So there's my little rant on canals and navigations. But this is kind of cool. Stand here and just take a look at things. Imagine another day or so, this will all be underwater. There should be about 12 feet of water in here that afford the navigation. So what will happen is those dams will be set, those will be lowered, and they'll start backing up water, and it'll create a navigation pool on this side of the dam and on that side of the dam. And the way the boats get around it is to go through the lock, and they'll do that a series of steps across the state, taking them from the Hudson River to Lake Erie at Buffalo. These dams here, the reason I'm here is because these bridge dams are the only surviving type of their style, or however you want to say it, in the world. These were a very short fad, we can call it, at the end of the 1800s, early 1900s, where they started using these bridge dams on rivers such as the Mohawk River. The Mohawk River is a perfect river for it. And they started building these in Europe, and basically you're hanging the dam from the bridge, so they're called a bridge dam. There are other dams across where you have a bridge across the dam, but technically these are where the whole structure is carried by the bridge, by the truss work there. And so they'll lower that down and create the dam. And like I say, they're the only style, or the only remaining examples of their type in the world. All the other ones kind of fell out of fashion, and they started using something else. So it'd be cool to see those go in. So the movable dam we see here, the bridge dam style of the movable dam, because there are lots of variations of movable styles of dams. But the bridge dam style was an offshoot of what was called a trestle dam. And a trestle dam was designed in the 1830s in France. And basically what a trestle dam was a dam that was mounted, a series of trestles were mounted in the bottom of the river. I'm going to work my way down to the river here. So what they would have is a stone, or later a concrete sill along the river, and to that they would bolt trestles. And if you ever seen a railroad trestle, it looked just like that. So you had all these frames, individual frames or individual trestles, and they were hinged, and they would be connected to the sill in the bottom of the river, and they would fold down, so they could lay down like that. So during the time of natural navigation or winter time or high flow or whenever they didn't want the dam in operation, they would just lay those trestles down on that sill. Problem was, it was all exposed to the ice flows, to the debris, anything, could come along and sweep those away. But for the most part, they were the styles of rivers they were using them in. They didn't have that issue that we see in the Mohawk River here. When they wanted to activate or deploy the dam, the lock tender or the guy who was in charge of the dam would start on shore, and he would just had a chain, and he would pull up the first trestle, and then he would put a piece of board between the bank and the first trestle, and then he would walk out to the end of that trestle, and then he would pull up the next trestle, and they could just pull those up all the way across the river. Then you would have so what you would basically have is, like I said, it looked like a railroad bridge or a highway bridge you could walk across. So you had trestles, and you had a board you could walk across the top of it. Then to the Poirier, who was the engineer in France who developed this, came up with a series of slats or wooden slats called needles, and they would lay them against the sill in the bottom of the river and against the top of the board on the trestle, and you'd start just laying all these needles in across the river, and that would create your dam face. And the dam face, eventually, you'd have a complete dam built across the river. And the idea was, if you needed to regulate that, if you needed to let more water through, you could come along and pull out a couple of boards, and the water would just flow through that area. Of course, it's flowing through at a rapid pace, and it's creating scour downstream, and there's a whole bunch of issues with that. But anyway, that's a simplified version of that. Then along came an engineer by the name of Bouley, and he was another French guy, and he came up with, he connected all the boards together and made basically larger boards or panels that he would put in there. And so now the dam needs, and for a while you'll see these steel plates called Bouley gates, because they were named after that guy, even though they're not. And the idea was that instead of having all these needles, the lock tenders had to go through and pull out and put back in, and they were very difficult to do. You got the water flowing through, a lot of pressure against it. So they made larger panels, and they would slide the panels, and now it becomes very mechanized. You got to have winches, you got to have a couple people. It takes a lot more effort to put it in, but the dam is capable of holding more. And now, instead of breaking the dam apart by pulling a needle, you could just raise or lower one of those Bouley gates, and that would help you regulate the flow. Later on, what they did is they started putting a spillway in the dam, so they could just open the spillway and they didn't have to mess with the dam. The dam, once the trestle dam went in, it was in. And so later on, you see in a lot of the papers, when they're building the Mohawk dams, you see these referred to as Bouley gates. And a lot of the engineers referred to them as Bouley gates, because that's what the engineer had in Europe. Technically, these are not Bouley gates. They're a little bit different. The example that's in Czech Republic, the Bouley gate was just basically a monolith, one gate. They weren't movable. You would just lower them, put them in place, and there was a lot of difference between them. And a lot of the New York engineers pushed back and said these are not Bouley gates, but you'll see that referred to as the Bouley buoy gates, but those steel panels, that's what they were given a name. So the succession was, from the Trestle Dam, so the Needle Dam on the Trestle Dam, or Needle Gates on the Trestle Dam, and then they went to the buoy gates. And there was actually another one called the Khmer Dam, which was kind of interesting because it used a system that was almost like a roll-up blind, like a Venetian blind, and you could pull the panel so you could roll it up or roll it down. And the idea was that you could incrementally up or raise or lower this gate. The Khmer Dam, there's one remaining in Manitoba, Canada, on the Red River. I think it's the Red River. They keep that as the only surviving example of its type. There were not a lot of them made. We have, I think, 8 or 10 of these movable dams in New York State, which quadrupled the number in the entire world. And the Khmer Dam in Canada was even more short-lived than that. But they credit to the Canadian government because they keep it functional. And but it was it had like a Venetian blind, and you would just basically roll up the dam or roll the dam back down. And quite an innovation. Now, I asked an engineer when I was writing the book, I said, well, what would you use now? Because these are fall out of fashion. He says basically they have different ways of doing it, but they have actually an inflatable bag underneath a panel, and they mount it to the bottom. So almost like the old style trestle dams, they have it mounted to the bottom of the river, except it's flat plate so it doesn't get hung up and carried away. And they inflate it, and they can use air, and they can just inflate it up, and that creates your dam. And then if they have to remove it, boom, away it goes. It's gone. The other thing I have failed to point out is that movable dams were in use on rivers where they had navigation when the river was navigable without dams. The Ohio River, the Mississippi River, rivers like that are deeper, slow-moving, where they might go a little bit dry in the summertime where they need a little bit of help, but they had times where they could just take out a dam. And they had the Ohio system uses what they call the Wicket Dam, and a Wicket Dam was more of an American invention, but it had a panel that came up like that, and there's a video on YouTube from the Army Corps of Engineers, them using it. They're quite a beast. But they would pull them up, and there would be a flapper, and it could open itself up. It could self-regulate. Never really worked real well, but the idea was that you could put up these wickets, and as the water pressure got too much, it would basically trip the wicket and allow water to flow. Then it would self-regulate, then the wicket would pop back in. Never really worked well, but they did keep the wickets going. They just replaced the last ones on the Ohio River in the last decade. But the wicket dams were built so you could have navigation pass right over. Now, again, I've said a couple times throughout this, the Mohawk River is completely different than the Ohio River. It's shallower, it's faster moving, it doesn't have the deep pools. I mean, the Ohio River and the Mississippi River are, many feet deep, whereas the Mohawk River you could walk across in most cases. So the idea of having a movable dam when dry periods, well, if you have steamships going through, they have smokestacks, they have high infrastructure, high above the water line. So you wouldn't want a steamship or a paddle wheeler trying to pass underneath the dam here, because obviously it's going to whack into it. So the trestle style dams and the wicket dams and all those were removable. And the whole problem with a bridge dam is that the infrastructure for the dam is over the river. So now you're never going to get a barge or a ship underneath this. Now, to be fair, if the river here was 12 feet deep, they could pass underneath these. These are high enough for that. But if I'm talking about like a paddle wheeler or a laker or something like that, could never go underneath that. So by putting the bridge in place, you're kind of limiting the height of the navigation during your free open use of the river, if that makes any sense. So basically, having this infrastructure in place, if you put it across, say, like Ohio River, and use this style dam in the Ohio River, you know, if the river was running high, or if the river was, you know, if the ship sat high, you could never run a boat down the river with this in place. So this is kind of permanent, kind of limited to what the river could do, but it was built specifically for this application, if that makes any sense whatsoever. They did, in France, they had a Khmer dam, I think it was, and they actually, to use the river, they had a bridge dam like this, and they had a couple spans this height, and then the last two spans were sat about 20 or 30 feet higher. So in case the river was navigable without the dam in place, they could use that channel. But that dam has been converted. And now they just, the shippers wanted to know that they were going to have a consistent whatever, 9 feet, 10 feet, 12 feet, 14 feet. They wanted to know that they were going to have, for their boats, they were going to be able to load their boats to 10 feet in draft and have 12 feet of water underneath. Having the river up and down, having shallow areas, it doesn't work quite well. So by putting the dams in place and creating navigable pools that were a certain depth, the shippers could rely on that. So that's pretty much why they got away from the old trestle style movable dams and the wickets and all that stuff. And you know, pretty much now everything is all dam and locks. Anyway, that is your little more of the primer on movable dams. The one big difference between this dam and the one in the Czech Republic is the Czech Republic had, I think it was 5 spans across it, and only the center spans had the actual movable dam part components. All these parts you see here, if you look at those pictures from that period, that original dam, looks very similar. But on the sides, they used the old style trestle dams. So basically, on the end trusses, so there were 5 spans, and the 2 of the 4 had these trestle dams. So it was actually a hybrid between the old movable style dam that rested in the bottom of the river and this bridge dam idea that they were trying out. So since the movable dam, the trestle style dams wouldn't work in the Mohawk River, David Watt just made them all to be like this, with the hanging uprights. So that's the big difference between the European style and the American style. All these dams, some of the ones, all depends on the width of the river. You'll see some of these have the 2 spans, 2 bridge trusses here. Some have 3. When you get down further in the eastern part of the river, where the river's wider, they have 3. This one has 2. These 2 here are the longest span of all the spans, because what happened was, just upstream of here is where the Schoharie River comes in, and a lot of ice and debris would flush down from that. So they wanted to have as clear a span as possible here. So even though the river's quite wide here, they didn't want to have an extra pier sitting out here to collect stuff, possibly collect stuff. So they made 2 very long spans here, and then as you get further down the river, you'll see that the other ones to the east are all 3 spans. They're shorter spans, and they're all 3 spans. To the west of here, there are 15 of these total, or locks 8 through 15 basically. So lock 8 is the first one to the east down by Schenectady. Lock 15 at Fort Hunter, or Fort Plain, is the one mostly to the west of the true Mohawk style dams. So to the east of here you have 3 spans, to the west of here you have 2 spans. Hope that makes sense. Let's go down.